Hello and good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth. This is your Access and Privacy Online News Summary for Saturday, May 16th. This week we begin in Alberta, where the voter list breach continues to widen, with Elections Alberta warning that the number of people who access the data may be incomplete while privacy, election, and police investigations continue. We then turn to a network update on political privacy, Bill C-25, Bill C-22, and BC's Bill 9, all part of a broader national debate about who controls personal information and who gets access to public records. We'll also look at connected cars after General Motors agreed to a record California privacy penalty for selling driver data. And we'll examine the Canvas cyberattack affecting thousands of schools, along with privacy stories involving PowerSchool, body cameras, medical AI, tax account breaches, and public accountability. All before we dive into other stories from the week. Don't forget you can find links to all the reporting that informs these summaries in our show notes. Let's dive in. We begin with the latest developments in Alberta's voter list breach, one of the clearest examples in Canada of what can happen when sensitive democratic data is shared without meaningful privacy safeguards. Elections Alberta now says it believes at least 568 people accessed a database containing names and addresses from Alberta's official voter list, and the Centurion Project identified 23 individuals who were given full copies of the voter list. Cease and desist letters have been sent to all those identified as accessing the information. The database was operated by the Centurion Project, a pro-separatist group that was not legally entitled to hold or use the list. The agency has said the data was traced back to an official voter list that had been legally provided to the Republican Party of Alberta. How it moved to the Centurion Project remains under investigation by Elections Alberta, the RCMP, and Alberta's Information and Privacy Commissioner. The story continues to evolve. Elections Alberta identifies the access list it received from the Centurion Project may be incomplete, and thousands of people may have viewed the data before the site was taken down by court order. Two reporters with the Canadian Press accessed the public database the same day the court ordered it to be taken down, and investigations were announced. One of the two reporters did not receive a cease and desist letter and informed Elections Alberta of the discrepancy. Both Chief Electoral Officer Gordon McClure and Privacy Commissioner Diane McLeod have called for stronger legal protections, and McClure has gone even further, saying the list of electors should not be shared with political parties again until the law is amended. That is a significant statement. Alberta's voter list includes highly sensitive information, names, home addresses, polling information, and other identifiers. For people fleeing violence, public officials, journalists, political workers, and frontline nonprofit staff, exposure of that information is not an abstract privacy issue. It can create real safety risks. McClure has said he will share recommendations with the legislature when investigations conclude. Former Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has said he is changing his personal security after his information was reportedly displayed during a Centurion Project meeting and is now consulting with lawyers about launching a lawsuit against those responsible for the breach. Nonprofit workers in Alberta are also raising concerns that they are now being asked to help vulnerable people navigate privacy and safety risks while managing those same risks. There are also serious accountability questions. Premier Danielle Smith has said a United Conservative Caucus staffer attended an April 16th meeting where the tool was demonstrated. The executive director of the caucus was then briefed on the meeting, but that information was not escalated to her office. Opposition MLAs say the government should have known earlier and should have acted faster. Meanwhile, Elections Alberta says Centurion Project leader David Parker has not cooperated with its cease and desist process. Parker's lawyer says the demand for a sworn declaration is improper, while other investigations are underway. Parker has had a combative history with Elections Alberta, including a $120,000 fine to another political activist group run by him for breaching the electoral financing rules. The breach is now also connected to broader concerns about democratic integrity. CSIS Director Dan Rogers told CBC that a possible Alberta referendum would be vulnerable to disinformation and foreign interference by bad actors in Russia and in the United States, especially where a divisive issue could be amplified by hostile actors. Premier Smith has now obtained top secret security clearance to receive CSIS briefings, though she downplays CSIS concerns, saying there is no credible evidence of foreign interference. The lesson is not confined to Alberta. FIPA has been warning that political parties handle some of the most sensitive information in democratic life, while often operating outside the privacy rules that apply to businesses, charities, and public bodies. In British Columbia and Quebec, provincial privacy laws apply to political parties with stronger protections. Federally, they still do not. That is why FIPA continues to encourage listeners to learn more at voterprivacy.ca, that is voterprivacy.ca, and to sign House of Commons petition E-7237, which calls for enforceable privacy obligations, meaningful access rights, and independent oversight before the next federal election. Because the question at the center of the Alberta breach is the same question facing Parliament. Should political parties be trusted to police themselves when they collect, use, and disclose personal information about voters? Turning to FIPA's network update, this week brings together three major accountability files: political privacy, lawful access, and freedom of information in British Columbia. First, at the federal level, FIPA has filed its submission on Bill C-25, the Strong and Free Elections Act, with the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Bill C-25 adds new requirements for federal political parties to publish and maintain privacy policies, but FIPA's concern is that the bill still leaves the core problem intact. Political parties would remain largely responsible for writing and enforcing their own rules with few legislative requirements. Voters would still lack a meaningful right to access or correct the personal information parties hold about them. And there would still be no independent oversight with clear authority to investigate party practices or enforce compliance. FIPA's position is straightforward. Political data is highly sensitive, and privacy protections should scale up with that sensitivity. A framework based on internal party policies is not enough. That concern has become more urgent in light of the Alberta voter list breach. As FIPA President Mike Larson wrote this week, Alberta shows the consequences of a just trust us model for political privacy. The same structural weaknesses now appears at the federal level, where Bill C-25 risks entrenching a low-standard regime for federal political parties. FIPA is again encouraging Canadians to sign and share petition E-7237 and to ask their MPs a simple question: do they believe political parties should be subject to enforceable privacy laws and independent oversight? At the same time, civil liberties groups are sounding the alarm over Bill C-22, the federal government's proposed lawful access legislation. Our friends at the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group are urging people to contact MPs and members of the Public Safety Committee to oppose the bill. Critics say C-22 could lower the threshold for police access to personal information, expand technical capability obligations on service providers to enable police and CSIS to obtain communications and information for investigations, and open the door to data retention rules that would create large stores of metadata for up to a year. The government says the bill is needed to help police and intelligence agencies respond to modern crime, but companies, law professors, and civil liberties advocates say the powers are too broad, the safeguards too weak, and the privacy risks too serious. And in British Columbia, Bill 9 remains a major concern for access to information advocates. Two independent MLAs helped the NDP government shut down debate on the bill in a vote that took place around 3 a.m., which some say shows that government does not want to be transparent. Critics say Bill 9 could make it easier for public bodies to reject requests that are arbitrarily considered abusive, malicious, or too disruptive to operations. The government says the bill is about modernization and efficiency. The Narwhal also published a detailed analysis of Bill 9 with an extensive interview with FIPA President Mike Larson, noting that BC is presenting its changes as different from other provinces that have pulled back access rights, but that some proposed amendments could still give public bodies more power to refuse requests for unrelated reasons. For FIPA, the pattern matters. Across Canada, governments are increasingly describing restrictions on access and privacy rights as administrative modernization. but efficiency cannot become a substitute for accountability. Whether the issue is political party data, lawful access, or freedom of information, the public interest depends on enforceable rights, independent oversight, and meaningful transparency. Now to connected cars, a file FIPA has worked on for more than a decade. General Motors has agreed to pay $12.75 million in civil penalties in California after regulators allege the company sold driving data from hundreds of thousands of motorists to data brokers without proper consent to charge drivers higher premiums. The data included names, location information, contact information, and driving behavior. Officials said the information was shared with LexisNexis, Risk Solutions, and Verisk Analytics. GM made about $20 million from the sale of the data between 2020 and 2024. The settlement is the largest ever under California's consumer privacy law. GM must also stop selling data to consumer reporting agencies for 5 years and submit privacy assessments to the state. This follows earlier U.S. scrutiny after reports revealed that driver data collected through connected vehicle services could make its way to insurers and affect premiums. The Canadian implications are clear. FIPA's 2015 report, The Connected Car, Who's in the Driver's Seat, warned that vehicles were becoming computers on wheels, collecting location data, driver behavior, infotainment data, account information, and other details that can reveal intimate patterns of daily life. Infotainment services include hands-free communications, web browsing, social networking, and streaming via the car's built-in interface. It also includes applications designed specifically for the car. FIPA's 2019 update found improvement in automakers' privacy policies, but still identified major gaps when measured against Canadian data protection principles. It was found that key elements of these policies were often unclear or overly broad. More recently, FIPA's past executive director, Vincent Gogolek, wrote in policy options warning that debates about Chinese electric vehicles being spy cars risk missing the broader issue. Connected vehicles from many manufacturers already collect, use, and share large amounts of driver data, even from something like a heated seat subscription. That's the central point. The privacy risk is not limited to one country, one brand, or one technology. It is built into the connected vehicle business model, and indicators show that policies will not be improving anytime soon. Canadian law still depends heavily on consent, notice, and organizational accountability, but those tools are weak when consumers cannot realistically understand, negotiate, or opt out of complex vehicle data ecosystems. The GM settlement should be treated as a warning. Cars are no longer just transportation. They are data platforms, and Canada still lacks the strong, sector-specific rules needed to protect drivers. Staying with cyber risks, schools and universities are dealing with the fallout from a cyber attack on Canvas, the online learning platform used to manage exams, grades, assignments, course materials, and communications between students and instructors. The attack came during final exam season and briefly knocked Canvas offline for many users. While Canvas is online again, some schools have continued to block students and teachers from accessing Canvas. The hacking group, Shiny Hunters, who was also responsible for an attack on Ticketmaster, claimed responsibility. Reports indicated that nearly 9,000 schools worldwide may have been affected, and the group threatened to leak data unless payments were made. Instructure, the company behind Canvas, said the breach appeared to involve names, emails, student ID numbers, and messages on the platform. The company said it had not found evidence that passwords, dates of birth, government identification, or financial information were compromised. In Canada, post-secondary institutions, including the University of Toronto, Mohawk College, OCAD University, Western University's Ivey Business School, UBC, Simon Fraser University, and the University of Alberta reported being affected. The Federal Privacy Commissioner's Office said it was aware of the matter and had reached out to the company. Ontario's Privacy Commissioner also said it was monitoring the incident. Instructure later said it had reached an agreement with the unauthorized actor to return and delete the stolen data, but didn't provide any details on the agreement, including whether it involved a payment. The company also acknowledged the hard truth of ransomware incidents. There is never complete certainty when dealing with cybercriminals. This breach echoes the earlier PowerSchool incident, which affected millions of current and former students, parents, and staff in Canada and the United States. The deeper issue is the concentration of risk. Education systems now rely on a small number of outside platforms for essential functions. When one is compromised, the impact can spread across thousands of schools almost instantly. For students and educators, advice remains practical. Be cautious of phishing messages, use strong and unique passwords, enable multi-factor authentication where available, and treat urgent password reset or account warning emails with care. For institutions, the lesson is broader. Contracts, privacy impact assessments, breach response plans, and vendor oversight cannot be treated as paperwork. They're core parts of protecting students, staff, and public trust. Turning to Canadian privacy stories, we begin with that separate education sector breach. Newfoundland and Labrador's Information and Privacy Commissioner has released a report on the PowerSchool hack, warning that governments need to work together to hold major technology vendors accountable. The breach affected more than 285,000 current and former students, teachers, parents, and caregivers in Newfoundland and Labrador. The commissioner found the province's education department didn't have adequate measures in place to monitor whether PowerSchool was meeting its contractual and security obligations. The report also found that unnecessary data, including healthcare numbers, had been collected and was accessed. The report outlined a series of recommendations, including that the department renegotiate its agreement with PowerSchool to address the privacy and security of personal information. The message is important. Smaller jurisdictions can struggle to demand stronger privacy and security protections from dominant technology companies. That makes intergovernmental cooperation and stronger procurement safeguards essential. And in Ontario, LGI reporter Keziah Royer-Burkett at burlingtonlocalnews.ca reports that Metrolinx has begun rolling out body cameras across GO Transit network. The cameras will be used by frontline officers and safety staff beginning at Union Station and will capture audio and video during defined interactions. This includes safety incidents, investigations, and fare-related encounters. Metrolinx says the cameras will not record continuously and that officers must notify people when recording begins. The agency says footage will be securely stored with access controls. In addition to worn devices, dash cameras are also being installed in customer protection officer vehicles. The public safety rationale is clear. But body cameras also raise privacy questions about notice, retention, access, secondary use, and whether the technology changes the relationship between the employer and employee transit staff and passengers. Meanwhile, LGI reporter Fatima Syed at the Narwhal reports that Ontario's government has directed conservation authorities to halt major financial, asset, and employment decisions while the province prepares to consolidate 36 conservation authorities into 9. These restrictions are in place until at least February 1st, 2027, when the consolidation is expected to take effect. Ministry officials did not answer whether the source water protection regions would be consolidated. The story is mainly about governance and environmental oversight, but it also has transparency implications. The Narwhal obtained a recording of an internal meeting where ministry officials discussed the process, uncertainty around water source protection, and cabinet confidentiality. When a major restructuring affects public bodies responsible for drinking water protection and watershed management, the public needs clear information about who is making decisions, what records are available, and how local expertise will be preserved. Meanwhile, Ontario's Auditor General has raised concerns about medical AI transcription tools. Auditor General Shelley Spence found gaps in how AI scribe software was evaluated, including accuracy issues and missing security and privacy documentation. Some vendors were approved despite lacking third-party audit reports, threat risk assessments, or privacy impact assessments as part of the request for bids process. That matters because medical notes are not ordinary records. If an AI system hallucinates, misstates, or mishandles sensitive patient information, the consequences can be serious. The Minister of Public and Business Service Delivery and Procurement said medical practitioners will always review the notes before a decision is made, and that hallucinations and other issues have only arisen during the testing phase, which the software is still in. And in Vancouver, Mayor Ken Sim has clarified that his use of 11 AI agents is strictly personal. Sim said the tools are used on a personal computer, not connected to city systems, and not used for municipal decision making or confidential information. Meanwhile, BC Premier David Eby encouraged legislators to experiment with AI chatbots, saying part of being an elected official means understanding both the threats and the opportunities of new technologies as they arrive. The episode is a useful reminder for public officials. Even personal experimentation with AI can raise public concerns where the line between personal, political, and official work is not clearly explained. At the federal level, NDP public safety critic Jenny Kwan is calling for more transparency around an RCMP memorandum of understanding with China's Ministry of Public Security. Public statements indicate the memorandum concerns cooperation on transnational crime, cybercrime, narcotics, corruption, and the establishment of bilateral law enforcement working groups. Kwan says Canadians deserve to know what information is being shared, what safeguards exist, and how the agreement protects dissidents, journalists, human rights defenders, and diaspora communities from transnational repression. She wants Ottawa to provide a public explanation of all related oversight, accountability, privacy, and charter compliance mechanisms. Public Safety Canada says such agreements are confidential and information sharing must comply with Canadian law. Kwan argues the public needs assurance that cooperation with foreign law enforcement does not compromise privacy, charter rights, or community safety. And finally, in Canadian privacy, the Federal Privacy Commissioner has tabled a special report on the Canada Revenue Agency. Commissioner Philippe Dufresne found more than 42,000 breaches at the CRA since 2020 involving unauthorized access to or modification of taxpayer information. Dufresne found the revenue agency couldn't provide details of every confirmed breach due to limitations in its tracking systems and the overall volume of incidents. The agency could not always adequately explain how attackers managed to bypass authentication processes. The report identified gaps in prevention, monitoring, detection, and breach handling, and found that the agency did not implement mandatory multi-factor authentication in a timely way. The CRA accepted 8 of the Commissioner's 9 recommendations in full and 1 in part. For taxpayers, the report is a reminder that account security, identity protection, and institutional safeguards all must work together. Now to Canadian access to information stories. The federal government has issued a request for information from potential suppliers to the defense industry as it considers options to upgrade or replace Canada's aging tank fleet. A UK-based defense outlet reported in January that Canada is in the market for more than 250 armored fighting vehicles. The request is part of a broader review of future armored land vehicle capabilities. The Canadian Army has warned that years of counterinsurgency and peace operations have left serious gaps in heavy armor capacity. The access issue here is procurement transparency. Defense projects are expensive, complex, and often shielded by commercial confidentiality and national security claims. Early-stage requests for information can now help show what the government is considering, but the public will still need continued visibility as options narrow and costs become clearer. Staying in Ottawa, the federal government has spent more than $800 million on artificial intelligence-related agreements since 2023, according to data provided in response to a written question from a Conservative MP. The figure includes a $350 million public service contract with Dayforce to replace the Phoenix PACE system, a $240 million investment in Cohere, and many smaller subscriptions, pilots, licenses, and contracts. It also includes hundreds of entries that range from a few $100s for a ChatGPT subscription to multi-million-dollar contracts with various companies. The government says the number should not be read as one single total for AI tools because it combines different categories of spending, but the response also shows a major transparency gap. Not all departments provided information, and some said they do not track AI spending in a centralized way, meaning the total spending is higher than the amount provided in the government's response. For the public, that makes it difficult to understand where AI is being used, what risks have been assessed, and whether appropriate privacy, procurement, and accountability safeguards are in place. In Ontario, Liberal MPP Lee Fairclough has entered the party's leadership race and pledged to repeal the Ford government's law, shielding the Premier, ministers, and their offices from Freedom of Information laws. That commitment shows how access reform is becoming a visible political issue in Ontario after recent changes that critics say restrict public access to key government records. The next Liberal leader will be elected in November. LGI reporter Paige Seaburn at the Lake Report brings us a story from the upcoming municipal elections. Council candidate Weston Miller is campaigning on resident-first leadership, carefully managed growth, and better access to information. Miller said residents in local media should not have to file formal Freedom of Information requests to obtain basic information from the town due to the amount of time it takes and how difficult it can be to navigate. And finally, in this section, LJ reporter John Watson at the Strathmore Times reports that Wheatland County is moving to Calgary 911 as its future fire dispatch provider. The county said the decision followed a request for proposal process involving confidential and commercially sensitive information, and that closed session discussion was justified under Alberta access law. It's estimated the transition from Wademza to Calgary 911 will take approximately 6 months at maximum in order for it to take place as seamlessly as possible. Local firefighters have raised concerns about losing local dispatch knowledge, especially in rural settings where geography and radio reliability matter. There have also been concerns about the potential loss of being able to speak with dispatchers via cell phones. The story captures a familiar tension. Procurement processes often require confidentiality, but public service decisions, especially those involving emergency response, still need enough transparency for residents and frontline workers to understand the risks, trade-offs, and reasons behind the choice. Now to international stories. In Tucson, Arizona, a community-built map tracks immigration enforcement activity. The map also includes police facilities and immigration detention facilities, along with flight paths of various federal agencies' surveillance flights. The Tucson Migra map draws on reports from rapid response observers, community members, local news, social media, and neighborhood networks. It does not claim to be a real-time alert system. Instead, it documents past enforcement actions, classifying incidents as confirmed or credible but unconfirmed. A rapid response member said one could file a Freedom of Information Act request and get the exact same information that they're providing on the map. Supporters say the map brings visibility to immigration enforcement that can otherwise remain out of public view. Federal officials and critics of similar tools have argued that tracking enforcement activity can put officers at risk. The project sits at a difficult intersection of access, safety, migration, and public documentation. It raises important questions about who gets to collect information about state power, what safeguards are needed, and how communities document enforcement without increasing risk. In France, prosecutors have opened an investigation into X and Elon Musk over alleged offenses involving child sexual abuse images, deepfakes, unlawful collection of personal data, disinformation, and content generated by the Grok AI system. The investigation comes less than 3 weeks after Musk and a former CEO of X were both summoned for voluntary interviews to discuss the allegations. They did not show up, but French authorities said this wouldn't hinder the investigation. French authorities say the investigation includes allegations related to the possession and distribution of child sexual abuse material, non-consensual images, denial of crimes against humanity, and manipulation of automated data processing. X and SpaceX did not immediately respond to requests for comment. The allegations are serious, and they reflect the growing legal pressure on platforms and AI systems to address unlawful content, harmful synthetic media, and the processing of personal data. Up next, we have a timely digital spring cleaning reminder. Cybersecurity experts say dormant accounts, forgotten apps, old files, and weak passwords all increase the risk of scams and identity theft. The advice is simple: delete unused apps and accounts, update software, review privacy settings, remove unnecessary third party account access, use a password manager, and enable multi factor authentication or passkeys where available. Cybersecurity experts also advise taking the time to audit your digital footprint to see how exposed you are on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, and other social media platforms. Next, Meta is rolling out an incognito mode for WhatsApp users who chat with Meta AI. The company says private AI chats will not be saved by default, will disappear when the session ends, and will be processed in a secure environment that Meta says it cannot access. Incognito chat mode also has safety features to prevent the chatbot from answering questions about harmful topics. Users will only be able to type in questions and get text responses. They won't be able to upload or generate images. They'll also have to confirm their age because Meta doesn't allow users under 13 on its platforms. That move reflects a broader concern with generative AI. People often ask chatbots highly sensitive questions, including questions about finances, health, work, relationships, and personal safety. Privacy controls need to match the sensitivity of those interactions. And in the United States, the Federal Communications Commission is considering new Know Your Customer rules for voice service providers as part of an anti-robocall effort. The proposal could require customers to provide government identification, a physical address, a full legal name, and an existing phone number. Critics warn that could end one of the last semi-anonymous communication options available to people who rely on prepaid or low-cost phones. That includes people fleeing abuse, refugees, activists, or others who need a phone without exposing more personal information than necessary. There are proposed red flags like using an email deemed suspicious or possibly even paying for a phone bill with cryptocurrency. That would bring scrutiny from the FCC. Stopping robocalls is a legitimate goal, but as with so many privacy debates, the question is proportionality. Whether the cure creates a larger surveillance and identification problem than the harm it is meant to solve. That's it for this week's Access and Privacy Online News Summary. As always, we hope today's stories help you stay informed about the latest issues shaping privacy, information management, public transparency, and democratic accountability. To help us keep the mics on, please subscribe through FIPA News Monitoring, share the show, or consider making a donation. And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music in today's show was composed by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. Thank you for joining. A big FIPA thank you to all the reporters, outlets, researchers, and community members whose work makes this podcast possible, and to you, our listeners, for staying engaged. Stay safe and stay informed.